They were starving, and when I handed them my food, she couldn't hold back her tear. The bitter wind howled across the frozen wasteland, whipping snow against Scott Richards' face as he trudged through knee-deep drifts. His thermal suit and shearling coat offered decent protection, but the relentless cold of this alien world still found ways to seep into his bones. The supply run had taken longer than expected, and the setting of the system's distant red dwarf star painted the snow-covered landscape in eerie crimson hues. Scott adjusted the pack on his shoulders, feeling the meager weight of his gathered provisions. 3 weeks of scavenging the abandoned research outpost had yielded precious little: some preserved rations, medical supplies, and a handful of those peculiar orange fruits that seemed to grow even in this harsh environment. The fruits were a lucky find. Their sweet tart flesh contained enough nutrients to keep him going, though they were frustratingly rare. His cabin lay another 2 kilometers north, a sturdy prefab structure he'd discovered shortly after his emergency landing. The crash had left his distressed beacon damaged beyond repair, and the nearest human settlement was several systems away. Until rescue came, if it ever did, survival was his only priority. Movement caught his eye, a flash of pale purple against the white expanse. Scott dropped into a defensive crouch, his hand instinctively moving to the plasma pistol at his hip. The settlement should have been abandoned. His previous sweeps had found no signs of life. The figure emerged from behind a half-buried storage unit, a humanoid female, her lilac skin almost luminescent in the fading light. She wore what appeared to be a rough brown cloth wrapped around her slender frame, offering little protection against the brutal cold. Her light purple hair whipped around her face as she clutched something to her chest, a bundle that moved. "Holy shit," Scott breathed, rising slowly. The woman's eyes met his, light blue, like Earth's summer sky, and he saw fear there, along with something else. Desperation. The bundle in her arms shifted, revealing a tiny face that shared its mother's lilac complexion. The infant couldn't have been more than a few months old, and both mother and child bore the unmistakable signs of severe malnutrition. Scott's mind raced. His supplies were limited, barely enough to keep himself fed for another week. The logical choice would be to walk away, to ensure his own survival. But as he watched the woman trying to shield her child from the wind, logic seemed a poor substitute for humanity. "Hey," he called out softly, keeping his hands visible as he approached. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." He wasn't sure if she could understand him, but he kept his voice gentle and non-threatening. The woman backed away slightly but didn't flee. Her eyes darted between his face and the pack he carried, and Scott saw raw hunger in her gaze. Without hesitation, he shrugged off the pack and pulled out one of the orange fruits. "Here," he said, holding it out. "It's food. For you and the little one." She stared at the fruit, then at him, tears welling in her eyes. When she reached out to take it, her hand trembled. The moment her fingers closed around the fruit, she broke down completely, crystal tears freezing on her cheeks even as they fell. "Thank you," she whispered in perfect English, her voice rough from disuse. "Thank you?" Scott felt something tighten in his chest. "I've got more," he said, already reaching for another fruit. "And shelter, about 2 kilometers from here. It's not much, but it's warm and safe." The woman clutched her child closer, considering his words. "Why would you help us?" Scott gave her a small smile, running a hand through his tousled brown hair. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because nobody should have to face this place alone." He paused, then added, "I'm Scott." "Leda," she replied softly, "and this is Nova." The baby made a small sound, reaching out with tiny fingers toward the fruit her mother held. "Well, Leda and Nova," Scott said, glancing at the darkening sky, "what do you say we get out of this cold?" The wind intensified as Scott, Leda, and little Nova began their trek toward the cabin. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the setting of the red dwarf, and Scott knew they needed to move quickly. He'd given Leda his shearling coat, keeping only his thermal suit for protection against the bitter cold. "There's a faster way," Leda said suddenly, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. She adjusted Nova against her chest, the infant surprisingly quiet despite their harsh surroundings. "Through the crystal caves." Scott paused, studying her face. "Crystal caves? Yes, I've been here longer than you might think." A small smile played across her lips. The caves cut through the ridge ahead. They're warmer too. Geothermal activity beneath." "How long have you been here?" Scott asked, intrigued by this revelation. 3 lunar cycles of this world, she replied, leading them toward a barely visible crevice in the snow-covered rock face. Nova was born here. Scott felt his respect for her growing. To survive in these conditions, alone with a newborn. You're remarkable, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. In the dim light, he could have sworn he saw a deeper purple flush color her cheeks. The caves helped. They're beautiful too, you'll see. As they entered the crevice, the wind's howl diminished to a distant whisper. The passage widened into a tunnel, its walls embedded with crystalline formations that seemed to capture and amplify what little light remained. The air was noticeably warmer, just as Leda had promised. This is incredible, Scott breathed, watching as the crystals cast prismatic patterns across Leda's lilac skin. The sight stirred something in him, an appreciation that went beyond mere aesthetic admiration. The crystals are bioluminescent, Leda explained, shifting Nova to one arm so she could trace a finger along the wall. The crystals responded to her touch, glowing brighter. They react to body heat. Scott moved closer, fascinated. His fingers brushed against hers as they both touched the crystal formation, and he felt a subtle current pass between them. Their eyes met in the ethereal light, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Nova's soft coo broke the spell, and they continued through the caves, but something had shifted in the air between them. As they walked, Leda shared more about her past. She was a xenobiologist from a world called Lumeria, part of a research team studying this planet's unique ecosystem. When civil war erupted on our homeworld, communication was lost, and their supply ship stopped coming. The rest of the team tried to leave in our emergency vessel, she said, her voice tight with emotion. It wasn't properly maintained. They didn't make it past the atmosphere. I was 8 months pregnant then. I chose to stay. You made the right choice, Scott said softly. That took courage. What about you, she asked, glancing at him with those mesmerizing light blue eyes. How did you end up here? Scott explained about his cargo run gone wrong, the navigation system failure that had forced him to make an emergency landing. My distress beacon was damaged in the crash, he finished. Been here about 3 weeks now. Alone, Leda said. And there was something in her voice, understanding perhaps, or something more. Not anymore, he replied, helping her over a particularly rough section of cave floor. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, and he felt her lean slightly into his touch. The cave system opened into a larger chamber, where a pool of steaming water cast vaporous tendrils into the air. The walls here were completely covered in crystals, creating a dazzling display of light and color. We should rest here for a moment, Leda suggested. Nova needs feeding, and the warm air will do us good. Scott nodded, trying not to stare as Leda settled herself against a crystal-studded wall. She adjusted her rough brown garment to feed Nova, maintaining a modest demeanor despite the intimate act. The steam from the hot pool created a comfortable microclimate, and Scott found himself relaxing for the first time since leaving his cabin that morning. The crystals, he said, focusing on the ceiling to give Leda privacy. They're unlike anything I've ever seen. Do they serve a purpose beyond illumination? Leda's soft laugh echoed in the chamber. Always the practical human. Yes, they're actually a complex life form. They process geothermal energy and release oxygen as a byproduct. That's part of what makes these caves habitable. Is that what your team was studying? Among other things, she paused, adjusting Nova, who had fallen asleep at her breast. We discovered that the crystals respond differently to various species. They seem particularly reactive to human bioelectrical fields. As if to demonstrate, the crystals nearest Scott pulsed with a stronger glow. He reached out to touch one, and the light followed his fingers like ripples in a pond. Fascinating, he murmured. No wonder you chose these caves as a refuge. They've been kind to us, Leda said, her voice taking on a wistful quality. But it's been lonely. Nova is wonderful, but adult conversation has been sorely missed. She met his eyes, and there was a warmth there that made his pulse quicken. I know what you mean, Scott replied, moving to sit beside her. The isolation gets to you, makes you appreciate simple things like sharing a conversation with someone who understands. Their shoulders touched, and neither moved away. The crystal wall behind them thrummed with increased luminescence, responding to their combined presence. Nova slept peacefully in her mother's arms, her tiny face serene. We should continue soon, Leda said, though she made no move to rise. The cabin's not far now. through the northern exit, but she hesitated, then continued. Would you mind if we stayed here a moment longer? It's been so long since I felt safe. The vulnerability in her voice touched something deep in Scott's heart. We can stay as long as you need, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. Lita leaned her head against his shoulder, her light purple hair cascading over his arm. The gesture was innocent enough, but it carried a weight of trust that wasn't lost on him. The crystals around them pulsed in sync with their heartbeats, creating a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. Tell me about Earth, she whispered. I've only read about it in research papers. Tell me what it's really like. Scott smiled, remembering home. It's beautiful in a completely different way than this place. We have oceans that stretch beyond the horizon, forests that touch the sky, deserts that glow red in the sunset. As he spoke, painting pictures with his words, he felt Leda relax against him. The steam from the pool wrapped around them like a warm blanket, and the crystals provided a gentle, ever-shifting light show. In that moment, despite the harsh world outside and the uncertainties that lay ahead, Scott felt a profound sense of rightness. They stayed like that for what might have been minutes or hours, sharing stories in soft voices while Nova slept. When they finally rose to continue their journey, something had changed between them. A connection forged in the quiet intimacy of the crystal cave. The northern exit, as Leda had promised, led them through a series of gradually ascending tunnels. The air grew cooler, but remained far more manageable than the bitter wind outside. As they walked, Leda pointed out various crystal formations, explaining their properties and behaviors with the enthusiasm of a true scientist. Your knowledge is impressive, Scott commented, helping her navigate a particularly steep section. You must have been an exceptional xenobiologist. Must have been, she teased, raising an eyebrow. I still am, thank you very much. Just because I'm temporarily stranded doesn't mean I've lost my expertise. Scott grinned, enjoying this playful side of her. My apologies, Doctor. Please continue educating this humble cargo pilot about your fascinating crystals. Their laughter echoed through the tunnel, and even Nova stirred to coo happily at the sound. The moment was interrupted by a distant rumble. Not threatening, but a reminder of the world above. We're almost there, Alita said, her expression growing more serious. The cabins should be visible as soon as we exit the caves. But Scott... She caught his arm, her touch sending warmth through his thermal suit. Thank you. Not just for the food and shelter, but for making us feel human again. Well, you know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, he replied softly, covering her hand with his own. Their eyes met in the crystal-lit dimness, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with possibility. Nova chose that moment to wake fully, demanding attention with a series of insistent sounds. The tension broke, replaced by shared amusement at the infant's timing. Come on, Scott said, leading them toward the cave's exit. Let's get you both somewhere properly warm. The cabin's interior felt almost luxuriously warm after their journey through the crystal caves. Scott quickly kindled a fire in the small heating unit, while Lita settled Nova into a makeshift bed crafted from the spare thermal blankets. The single-room structure, though sturdy, suddenly seemed impossibly tiny for 3 occupants. A persistent beeping drew Scott's attention to his damaged distress beacon. The device's indicator light flickered erratically, the first sign of life it had shown in weeks. That's new, he muttered, examining the unit. Must be something about those crystals' energy signature. Leda moved closer, her scientific curiosity evident. The bioluminescent properties might have jump-started the power cell. Her proximity sent a wave of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the heating unit. If we could harvest some crystals carefully, their natural energy could provide a sustainable power source. But you're worried about disturbing the cave ecosystem, Scott finished, noting her conflicted expression. Their eyes met, and the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Yes, though there might be a way. She bit her lower lip thoughtfully, and Scott found himself tracking the movement. Some of the smaller formations are actually propagating spores. If we harvest those specifically, we'd be helping their distribution while gaining access to their energy. A cry from Nova interrupted their discussion. Leda attended to her daughter while Scott began preparing a meal from their limited supplies. The domestic scene felt surprisingly natural, as if they'd been sharing this space for months rather than hours. We need more room, Scott said, surveying the cabin's cramped quarters. The research station had some prefab panels we could salvage. With your knowledge of the local environment and my engineering experience, we could double the living space. Leda returned with a now content Nova. That's not a bad idea. There's also some equipment at the station that might help repair your beacon. She paused, then added softly, though I find myself less eager for rescue than I perhaps should be. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Scott turned to face her fully, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. Leda. She closed the distance between them, Nova sleeping peacefully in her makeshift sling. You've given us more than just food and shelter, Scott. You've given us hope, a future. Her free hand found his chest, resting over his heartbeat. I never expected. Scott covered her hand with his own, marveling at how perfectly they fit together, despite their different species. Neither did I, he admitted. The attraction between them had been building since their first meeting, but now it blazed like a supernova. Their first kiss was tentative, exploratory. Their second was anything but. Later that night, after Nova was settled and their plans for expansion were sketched out, they lay together in the cabin's small bed, their bodies intertwined. The heating unit cast a warm glow across Leda's lilac skin as she traced patterns on Scott's chest. My people, she murmured. We believe in soul resonance, the idea that certain beings are drawn together across the vastness of space for a purpose. She propped herself up on one elbow, her light purple hair cascading over her shoulder. When you found us today, when you shared your food without hesitation, I felt it. Scott brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling at its silk-like texture. I don't know much about soul resonance, he said, but I know I've never felt anything like this before. Their passion reignited but remained tender, mindful of their sleeping infant companion. In the aftermath, as Leda dozed against his chest, Scott found himself planning their future. The cabin expansion would be their first priority, followed by the beacon repair. The crystal harvest would require careful planning to ensure sustainability. Dawn brought new challenges and possibilities. They began salvaging materials from the research station, working efficiently as a team. Leda's knowledge of the local environment proved invaluable, while Scott's technical skills gave their plan structure. Nova watched their progress from a secure nest of blankets, occasionally cooing encouragement. The distress beacon's intermittent signals continued, strengthening whenever they brought harvested crystal spores near. Leda documented their effects meticulously, her scientific mind never fully at rest. The energy signature is remarkable, she explained, examining a particularly active specimen. With proper calibration, we might be able to boost the beacon's range significantly. Enough to reach a passing ship? Scott asked, pausing in his work on the cabin's new wall section. Possibly. She met his gaze, though I find myself hoping for a delayed rescue rather than an immediate one. Scott set down his tools and pulled her close, mindful of the crystal sample she held. We have time, he assured her. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Their kiss was interrupted by Nova's demanding cry. They broke apart laughing, the joy of their new family unit evident in their shared mirth. As Leda tended to Nova, Scott resumed his work on the expansion, his movements energized by purpose and hope. The day progressed with steady productivity, punctuated by moments of tender connection. By sunset, the cabin's new section was taking shape, and several crystal spores had been carefully harvested for beacon enhancement. Their evening meal, though simple, felt like a celebration of their progress. As they settled in for the night, Nova sleeping peacefully in her improved bed space, Leda curled against Scott's side. I never imagined, she whispered, when I chose to stay here, that isolation would lead to such profound connection. Scott pulled her closer, marveling at how quickly she had become essential to his existence. Sometimes the universe has better plans than we do, he replied, thinking of the navigation failure that had brought him to this world. Their bodies came together again, a dance of discovery and deepening emotion. In the aftermath, as the planet's moons cast crystalline shadows through the cabin's small window, they discussed their plans for the coming days. The beacon's repair, the cabin's completion, the careful cultivation of crystal spores. All steps toward building a life together, whether rescue came soon or not. The enhanced distress beacon pulsed with a new intensity, its signal amplified by the carefully harvested crystal spores. Scott monitored the readings, while Lita documented the unexpected properties they discovered in the crystalline formations. Nova played contentedly nearby. Stronger now after weeks of proper nutrition and care. "These readings are extraordinary," Lita breathed, her scientific enthusiasm lighting up her features. "The crystals aren't just conducting energy, they're amplifying it exponentially. And look at this." She pointed to a complex pattern displayed on her salvaged research tablet. "They're creating a quantum resonance field." Scott moved behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders as he studied the data. The casual intimacy of the gesture felt natural now, after weeks of shared life and love. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we might have stumbled onto something revolutionary." She leaned back against his chest, her excitement palpable. These crystals could potentially revolutionize deep space communication. No more delayed transmissions, no more lost signals. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent beeping from the distressed beacon. Scott rushed to check the readout, his heart racing. "We're getting a response signal," he announced. "There's a ship within range." Lita's expression flickered between hope and uncertainty. "Already? I thought we'd have more time." Before they could discuss further, her research tablet chimed with new data. The quantum resonance readings had spiked dramatically, revealing previously undetected patterns in the crystal structure. "Scott," she whispered, "these readings, they suggest the crystals are part of a planetary-scale neural network. The entire cave system could be one massive living organism." The implications were staggering. Not only could this discovery transform space travel and communication, but it might also revolutionize their understanding of planetary consciousness. "The polar region," Leda continued, her voice gaining strength. "According to these readings, there's a massive concentration of crystal activity there. It could be some kind of central nervous system for the entire network." Scott glanced between the distress beacon and the tablet. "So we have a choice to make. Signal the ship for immediate rescue or investigate something that could change everything we know about interstellar travel and planetary life forms," Lita finished. She stood, moving to lift Nova into her arms. "But the polar expedition would be dangerous. The temperatures there are far worse than anything we've faced." Scott wrapped his arms around both of them, creating a family embrace that felt increasingly natural and necessary. "We've come this far together," he murmured against her hair. "Whatever we decide, we do it as a family." That night, after Nova was asleep, their passion took on an edge of urgency. Every touch, every kiss seemed to carry the weight of their impending decision. Their bodies came together with familiar intensity, but there was something new in their connection, a sense of destiny intertwined with desire. In the afterglow, Leda traced the now familiar patterns of Scott's muscles while he played with her light purple hair. "My people have a saying," she murmured. "When the path splits three ways, follow the one that frightens you most. It leads to the greatest rewards." "And which path frightens you most?" Scott asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "The polar expedition," she admitted. "Not because of the danger, but because of what we might find. If I'm right about the planetary consciousness..." She propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes bright with possibility. "It could change everything we thought we knew about life itself." The distress beacon chirped again, reminding them of their limited time to decide. Scott pulled her closer, savoring the feel of her lilac skin against his. "Then we prepare for the polar expedition," he said firmly. "But first, we need to send a coded response to that ship. Something that will keep them interested, but not prompt an immediate rescue attempt." Leda's smile was radiant. "I think I know just how to do that. The crystal resonance patterns, we can modify them to create a signal that suggests valuable scientific discoveries. Most ships would rather wait for a full report than risk a hasty rescue that might compromise potential profits." Their planning session evolved into another round of passionate intimacy, their shared excitement about the discovery feeding into their physical connection. Later, as they lay entwined, Leda suddenly stiffened. "Scott," she whispered, I think I'm pregnant." The news should have shocked him more than it did. Instead, it felt right, another piece of their evolving story falling perfectly into place. He pulled her closer, his hands splaying protectively over her still flat stomach. "Are you sure? I mean, is it even possible between our species?" Leda's laugh was soft and knowing. "My people are highly adaptable. genetically speaking, and we've certainly given it enough attempts. Her expression grew more serious. But a polar expedition in my condition? We'll find a way, Scott assured her, his protective instincts surging. We'll modify the environmental suits from the research station, create a secure transport for Nova. We've faced impossible odds before and won. Their lips met in a kiss that tasted of promise and adventure. The distress beacon's steady pulse mixed with the subtle glow of their harvested crystals, creating a rhythmic light show that seemed to celebrate their decision. As dawn approached, they began making lists of necessary preparations. The polar expedition would require careful planning, especially now with Leda's pregnancy to consider. But the potential rewards, both scientific and personal, made the risk worthwhile. You know, Scott said as they watched the first rays of the red dwarf paint the snow outside their window. When I first shared my food with you, I never imagined it would lead to all this. Leda's eyes shimmered with emotion, much like they had on that first day. The greatest journeys often start with the smallest acts of kindness, she replied, pulling him down for another kiss. The morning brought startling changes. Leda's pregnancy, barely announced the night before, was already showing visible signs of advancement. Her normally lilac skin glowed with an ethereal luminescence that matched the crystal formations, and her abdomen had developed a noticeable curve. The crystal energy must be accelerating the gestation, she explained, running her hands over the unexpected swell while Scott watched with a mixture of wonder and concern. My people's adaptive genetics combined with the quantum resonance? She paused, her scientific analysis giving way to raw emotion. Scott, this is unprecedented. Before he could respond, the distress beacon's signal pattern changed. The approaching ship was closer now, and its identification codes finally became clear. Leda's face drained of color as she read the display. It's a Lumerian military vessel, she whispered, instinctively pulling Nova closer. They're from the faction that started the Civil War, the ones I escaped from. Scott immediately moved to protective stance, his muscles tensing. How much time do we have? 3 days, maybe 4. She met his eyes, fear warring with determination. They'll have detected the crystal energy signature. That's probably what drew them here. They'd been searching for new weapon sources. The gravity of their situation settled over them. Their peaceful scientific expedition had suddenly become a race against time, complicated by Leda's rapidly advancing pregnancy. Scott pulled her into his arms, careful of her growing belly, while Nova cooed softly between them. We need to move fast, he said, his tactical mind already formulating plans. The polar expedition can't wait. Whatever secrets these crystals hold, we can't let them fall into the wrong hands. Leda nodded against his chest. The research station has an old terrain vehicle we could modify. With the crystal energy powering it, we could make it to the polar region in 2 days. They spent the morning in frenzied preparation, gathering supplies and modifying equipment. The vehicle, a robust 6-wheel transport, responded remarkably well to the crystal power source. Scott's engineering skills proved invaluable as they reinforced the passenger compartment to protect against the extreme polar conditions. As they worked, Leda's pregnancy continued its accelerated progression. By midday, she looked as if she were entering her second trimester. The crystal formations around them pulsed in sync with her changing body, creating an otherworldly light show that seemed to celebrate the unprecedented union of human and Lumerian life. How are you feeling? Scott asked, pausing in his work to brush a tender kiss against her temple. Strange, she admitted, leaning into his touch, but not uncomfortable. It's as if the crystals are nurturing the baby, preparing it for something. She trailed off, distracted by new readings on her tablet. Scott, look at this. The data showed an intense concentration of crystal energy focusing around her womb, forming patterns that matched the larger planetary network they'd discovered. The baby is resonating with the crystal consciousness, she breathed. It's as if our child is becoming a bridge between species. Their eyes met, the implications of this discovery adding new weight to their mission. This wasn't just about scientific breakthrough anymore. It was about protecting their child's destiny. That night, their lovemaking took on an almost spiritual quality, their bodies connecting beneath the pulsing light of the crystals while Nova slept peacefully in her protected corner. Leda's changing form only enhanced their passion, her increased sensitivity making every touch electric. The crystal light seemed to flow through them, binding them together in ways that transcended physical union. Dawn brought new challenges. The military vessel had accelerated its approach, cutting their timeline even shorter. As they loaded the last of their supplies into the modified vehicle, Lita suddenly doubled over, her hands pressed against her now prominent belly. "The baby," she gasped. "It's growing so fast. The crystal energy is—" Scott caught her before she could fall, guiding her to sit. Nova, sensing her mother's distress, began to cry. The crystals around them pulsed with increasing intensity, their light focusing on Lita's abdomen. "We need to get to the polar region," Lita said through gritted teeth. "The babe, it's drawing us there. The planetary consciousness, it knows something we don't." Scott helped her into the vehicle's passenger compartment, securing Nova in her specially designed safety seat. The crystal power core hummed to life, its energy synchronizing with the pulse that now seemed to emanate from Lita herself. As they began their journey north, the red dwarf's light caught the ice crystals in the air, creating halos that seemed to guide their way. Lita monitored both her pregnancy's progression and the approaching military vessel, her scientific training helping her maintain focus despite her rapidly changing condition. "The ship's energy signature," she said suddenly, studying her readings. "They're using crystal-based weapons, primitive versions, but still deadly. They must have found other deposits." Scott accelerated their vehicle, pushing the crystal power core to its limits. The landscape blurred past them, an endless expanse of white broken only by the occasional jutting rock formation. Nova watched the scene with unusual intensity, her infant features showing a comprehension that seemed beyond her age. "She feels it too," Lita murmured, reaching back to touch their daughter's hand. "The crystal consciousness, it's changing all of us, making us more than we were." The vehicle crested a rise, revealing the first glimpse of their destination. The polar region stretched before them, a forbidden landscape of ice spires and crystal formations that dwarfed anything they'd seen in the caves. And at its center, pulsing with power that they could feel even at this distance, stood a massive crystalline structure that seemed to pierce the very sky. The towering crystal spire loomed before them, its surface reflecting the aurora-like energies that danced across the polar sky. Lita's pregnancy had progressed dramatically during their journey. She now appeared full-term, her belly luminous with internal crystal energy. Nova sat unusually still in her safety seat, her infant eyes fixed on the massive structure ahead. "The military vessel is entering orbit," Scott announced, checking their modified sensors. "Their weapon systems are powering up." Lita's hands flew across her research tablet, analyzing the readings from the crystal spire. "The structure? It's not just a formation, it's a nexus point, a consciousness core." She gasped suddenly, her free hand pressing against her swollen abdomen. "The baby knows. Somehow, it understands what we need to do." Scott guided their vehicle into a natural crystalline dock that seemed to form spontaneously as they approached. The moment they stopped, the entire spire began to pulse with a rhythmic light that matched Lita's pregnancy glow. "We need to reach the core chamber," Lita said, her voice taking on an otherworldly resonance. "The baby, our child, is the key, a bridge between worlds, between consciousnesses." Scott helped her from the vehicle, supporting her weight as Nova actually floated, beside them, surrounded by a gentle crystal aura. The sight should have been shocking, but somehow felt natural in this extraordinary place. They had barely taken 10 steps when the first weapons blast from the orbital ship struck the planet's surface. Kilometers away, the crystal network shuddered, and Lita cried out in pain. "The weapons," she gasped, "they're using corrupted crystal energy. It's creating a cascade reaction in the planetary network. If they continue..." She didn't need to finish. The implications were clear in the way the surrounding crystals flickered and strained. Scott swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the spire's entrance while Nova drifted alongside them, seemingly guided by the same force that pulled them forward. The interior of the structure opened before them, revealing quarters of pure crystal that shifted and flowed like liquid light. Another orbital blast rocked the planet. Cracks appeared in some of the smaller crystal formations, leaking energy like wounded arteries. Lita's skin pulsed with answering light, and she clutched her belly in pain. "The core chamber," she managed through gritted teeth. "We have to complete the connection before the network destabilizes completely." They reached a vast central chamber just as a third blast struck, closer this time. The walls around them sang with distress, harmonics that set their teeth on edge. At the chamber's center stood a crystal altar, its surface rippling like quicksilver. "Put me down," Lita commanded softly. "This is where it has to happen." Scott gently set her on her feet but kept his arms around her. "What exactly are we doing?" "Creating harmony," she whispered, pulling him close. "The planetary consciousness, it's been waiting for this. For us. For what we created together." Her eyes met his, filled with love and certainty. "Our child isn't just a hybrid, Scott. It's an avatar, a being capable of bridging the gap between organic and crystal consciousness." Their lips met in a passionate kiss, their bodies pressing together despite her advanced pregnancy. The crystal energy around them surged, responding to their connection. Nova drifted to the altar's surface, settling there as if she'd always known her role in this moment. Another blast rocked the chamber. The military vessel was getting closer, its corrupted weapons threatening to shatter the very consciousness they'd discovered. But in that moment, held in Scott's arms, Lita felt only peace. "Make love to me," she whispered against his lips. "Right here, right now. The resonance of our connection. It's what the consciousness needs to stabilize." Understanding dawned in Scott's eyes. Their union had created something unprecedented, a perfect fusion of human, Lumerian, and crystal energy. Their passion now could save everything they discovered. Their coupling was transcendent, their bodies moving together on the crystal floor as Nova maintained her serene vigil on the altar. Each touch, each kiss sent ripples through the planetary network, counteracting the destructive resonance of the orbital weapons. As their passion peaked, Lita's labor began. The two events somehow perfectly synchronized. The chamber filled with blinding light as their unborn child responded to both the physical and spiritual energy surrounding them. Nova began to glow brighter, her infant consciousness reaching out to join with her unborn sibling. The crystal altar liquefied completely, flowing around her in protective waves as she became a conduit for the planetary consciousness. "Now!" Lita cried out, her voice echoing with power. "The connection! Complete it now!" Scott held her close as their second child entered the world in a burst of crystalline light. The instant the baby drew its first breath, Nova's glow intensified, creating a triangle of energy between the newborn, herself, and the crystal core. The next orbital blast struck directly above them. But this time, instead of causing damage, the energy was caught in their connection web. The corrupted crystal power transformed, purified by the pure resonance of their family bond. Through their joined consciousness, they could feel the military vessel's weapons failing as the crystal energy they'd corrupted reformed itself. The planetary consciousness surged through their family connection, reaching out to touch the minds of their attackers. Understanding flooded the ship's crew, understanding of what they'd nearly destroyed in their blind quest for power. The weapons powered down, and a message of surrender pulsed through the crystal network. Lita lay in Scott's arms, their newborn son cradled between them. His skin was a perfect blend of human and Lumerian tones, and his tiny body pulsed with gentle crystal light. Nova floated down from the altar to meet her brother, their auras mingling in perfect harmony. "What shall we call him?" Scott asked softly, watching their children's first interaction. Lita smiled, exhausted but radiant. "In my language, there's a word, Arxis. It means bridge between worlds." She touched their son's glowing cheek. "It seems fitting." The crystal chamber hummed with approval, and through their enhanced connection, they could feel the planetary consciousness embracing their family. They had created something entirely new, a future where human, Lumerian, and crystal could exist in perfect harmony. 1 year later, the Crystalline Research Center gleamed under the red dwarf's light, its elegant spires stretching skyward like frozen flames. What had begun as a simple act of sharing food with a starving woman had transformed into something beyond imagination, a nexus point for interstellar cooperation and understanding. Scott stood at the observation deck, watching as another diplomatic vessel descended through the aurora-painted sky. His reflection in the crystal walls showed a man changed by love and purpose, his piercing blue eyes holding wisdom earned through extraordinary experience. Warm arms encircled him from behind, and Lita's familiar scent enveloped his senses. "Remembering something?" she asked, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "The day we met," he replied, turning to face her. Those orange fruits that seemed so precious then. She laughed, the sound chiming in harmony with the surrounding crystals. Who could have known that simple act of kindness would lead to all this? All this included not only the research center they now called home, but their expanded family. Nova, now a toddler, played nearby with her younger brother Arxis, both children surrounded by gentle auras of crystal energy. Their games often involved creating beautiful patterns in the air, their natural connection to the planetary consciousness, allowing them to manipulate crystal energy with innocent joy. The latest diplomatic vessel landed smoothly on one of the crystal-formed platforms. This one carried representatives from both human and Lumerian peace councils, drawn by the unprecedented discoveries their family had helped unlock. The ancient records are clear now, Lita said, her scientific enthusiasm brightening her features. The crystal consciousness exists throughout the galaxy, waiting for species to evolve enough to recognize and connect with it. We just happened to create the perfect bridge. Scott pulled her closer, their bodies fitting together with practiced familiarity. Through love, he murmured against her hair. It all started with love. Their passionate connection had only grown stronger over the past year, enhanced by their link to the crystal network. Each intimate moment they shared seemed to strengthen not only their bond, but the planetary consciousness itself, creating ripples of harmony that spread throughout the developing interstellar community. Nova and Arxis ran to them, their crystal auras brightening with excitement. "The archives are singing again," Nova announced, her childish voice carrying the wisdom of ages. "They want to show us more." The ancient crystal archives discovered beneath the polar spire had been gradually revealing their secrets, each new understanding unlocked by the unique perspective their hybrid family provided. The combination of human determination, Lumerian adaptability, and crystal consciousness had opened doors previously thought sealed forever. "Let's not keep them waiting then," Scott said, lifting Arxis while Leda took Nova's hand. Together they made their way to the archive chamber, passing groups of human and Lumerian scientists working in perfect cooperation. The chamber hummed with ancient power as they entered, the crystal walls shifting to display star maps and quantum formulae that would have been incomprehensible a year ago. But their family's connection to the consciousness made understanding intuitive, natural. "Look," Lita breathed, pointing to a new pattern forming in the crystal matrix. "It's showing us the network's full extent. It spans the entire galaxy." The implications were staggering. What had begun as a desperate survival situation on a frozen world had evolved into the key to universal communication and cooperation. The crystal consciousness provided not just technological advancement, but a path to genuine understanding between species. That evening, after the children were asleep in their crystal-warmed rooms, Scott and Lita stood on their private balcony, watching the auroras dance across the polar sky, their bodies pressed together intimately, celebrating their connection in the way that had become both familiar and eternally new. "Sometimes I wonder," Lita murmured between passionate kisses, "what would have happened if you hadn't shared your food that day?" Scott traced the elegant curve of her neck, marveling at how her lilac skin still captivated him. "The universe knew what it was doing," he replied, "just like it knew we'd need the children to complete the connection." Their lovemaking that night was tender, yet intense, their enhanced awareness allowing them to share not just physical pleasure, but the deep emotional resonance that had grown between them. The crystal walls pulsed with their passion, spreading waves of harmonic energy throughout the network. Dawn brought new wonders. The diplomatic delegation revealed that other worlds were beginning to report crystal awakening, guided by the template their family had established. Humanity and Lumerians, once separated by fear and misunderstanding, were leading the way toward a new era of galactic cooperation. Nova and Arxis grew stronger daily, their unique abilities helping to train new generations of crystal communicators. Their very existence proved that love could transcend not just species, but consciousness itself. As Scott watched his family thrive, he reflected on how it had all begun, with a simple choice to share food with a starving woman and her child. That one act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction that would reshape the galaxy. Lita caught his thoughtful expression and smiled, understanding flowing between them through their crystal-enhanced bond. "Ready to make more history?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with both love and scientific curiosity. "With you?" Scott pulled her close, their foreheads touching as their children's laughter echoed through the crystal halls. always. The red dwarf painted the sky in crimson hues as another day began at the nexus of human, Lumerian, and crystal consciousness. Their family had become living proof that the greatest discoveries come not from conquest or competition, but from simple acts of kindness and love.